By now, when I walked into Jack Warner's office, I could enter without qualms. I even plunked myself down and stretched out my feet. Once, as a sign of bravado, I kicked off my shoes and yawned. In my incessant box with Jack over salary, story, direction, the way things were to be done, I had the problem how to overcome his particular charm. He usually threw me by opening up with some funny story. By the time he set the mood, my heat was diminished and I got the worst in the ensuing hassle. One day, I decided to get the jump on him. On the way to his offices, I passed a fire station. There were fire buckets about. I borrowed one. Before going up, I painted on the red bucket, in large white letters, "Tears." I walked in with this bucket. "Hello, Baron," he greeted me. That was what I usually called. "Have a cigar. Have a drink?" Always trying to calm me down. "No thanks," I said. His eyes fell on the fire bucket. "What the hell is that?" I turned it around so he could see the inscription. I said, "Jackson, this is for you, and you'll need it after you hear what you're going to pay me." He burst into a gale of laughter. This time, we got right down to business without having to go through his usual jokes, which so often threw me to the point of making me forget what I had come to see him about. Outside his office, Jack Warner had an endearing sense of humor and can outcomic most of the comedians I know. I stress outside because inside his office, you are confronted with all the ruthless business in Hollywood. That's Jack. Sometimes he almost knocked me off my chair laughing, especially the time there was an important luncheon for Madame Chang Shih Kai Shak. This distinguished lady rose to her feet and spoke of the troubles of nationalist China. At one point she paused, and in the silence Jack's voice came over loudly, saying to someone, "Jesus, that reminds me. I've got to send my laundry out." I doubt if the lady from China caught the idea, but I almost had a seizure trying not to laugh. Greer Garson was the first actress I worked with who was fun and helpful. Many of the other ladies with whom I had been associated either were a bit in awe of me or else hated me. But in That Forsyth Woman with Miss Garson, I really felt for the first time that I had a character role. I don't know whether I can convey how deep the yearning is of an actor who has been stereotyped, who has that sword and horse wound around him to prove to himself and to others that he's an actor. All those Hollywood years, a ghost haunted me. It was the ghost of my young self in England, just arrived from that ribald adventure across the world, and working at a whole variety of roles at Northampton for a year and a half, doing everything, anything, playing a father, a butler, a rogue, an adventurer, a clown, a killer, a cop, anything. I had that single sweet taste far back in England, till someone discovered I could look dashing pointing a sword, and bound that sword to my wrist for 2 decades. I worked hard for this role in That Forsyth Woman. Now I had the opportunity to show maybe that I could do something else. And it was a joy and a delight to have Greer playing opposite me. I think that picture was one of the few worthwhile vehicles in which I played. The popular conception of Greer is that she is kind of a Mrs. Minerva, finely bred, the epitome of English cultured womanhood. She is all this, but at the same time, a mischievous imp. Most people on the lot held her in awe, including the high brass at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. When I heard I was to do a picture with her, I built up a nervous reaction which I knew would be fatal. I had to do something about these nerves that were working up in me. When the time came to meet her, I primed myself with about 3 vodkas. When I was introduced, I adopt an air of bravado, the hearty Australian from the outback. I shook hands heartily. Then I slapped her on the fanny. "Hiya, Red," I said. Everybody froze. There was a brief pause. Then she went into a torrent of laughter. That broke the ice. Later, I told her how nervous I had been. Making the picture which was a great success and landed us a command performance in England. There was a scene in which Greer was dressed as a dignified Victorian. She knew the scene so perfectly that I figured a little levity wouldn't throw her. At one point, she had to go to a wardrobe room, open the door, take a dress out, and start putting it on. When at rehearsals, I saw that she was quite at ease in the bit, I got into the wardrobe myself. I crouched there, like a figure in a waxworks, clad only in a top hat. She went through the scene, as she was supposed to, first singing, then saying, "Now, Mabel, I'll put my dress on." I became Mabel. I screamed in a high falsetto, "Here I am, honey!" She jumped and dropped everything. Greer got even a few days later. We were shooting a scene in a Victorian carriage. I was supposed to be very pompous. I had my gold-headed walking stick between my legs, and I played this scene looking straight into the camera with a stiff grip on the head of my gold cane. There came a time when I had to open the door and say, "Now, my dear, shall we alight?" We didn't, but I sure as hell did, because as I touched the doorknob, the electric contact Greer had fixed right in the seat of my pants made me go through the air like a witch riding a broom. These childish things were good for the studio's atmosphere, I found. They loosened up everybody. They relieved tension. These gags, while they might appear juvenile, did much to lighten the air, at least for me. Tensions on the lot led me to create an environment of fun around me in my non-professional hours. A corps of actors who worked with me in most of my pictures aided and abetted me in providing the community with a little color, or off-color. Alan Hale, called the Sarge, and Gwyn Big Boy Williams, known as the Corporal, and myself, as the Colonel, were a triumvirate of shenanigans pullers. I always tried to keep the three of us together, in pictures and in my private life off the lot. Big Boy was bow-legged, and he weighed 250 pounds. I worked with him for years. He's a rough, tough Westerner whose face is familiar to millions of moviegoers. Big Boy had been going with that fireball Lupe Valez, which was another misalliance. There was never a more oddly assorted couple. Once, in the course of an argument with him at my house, she picked up a framed photo of him, beat him over the head with it, broke the frame, and nearly broke his head. She took the picture out of the frame, tore it into 2 pieces, then peed on it on my carpet. That incident was followed by a bit of additional violence outside of Mulholland House, and that led to the end of their rather poetic association. One of Big Boy's inexplicable hates, and I don't know the basis, was Orson Welles. Welles had always wanted to meet John Barrymore. One night, not long after Welles arrived in Hollywood, they met. Welles wore a beard in those days. Perhaps that was what inspired this dislike of him in Big Boy, to the point where he went into a store with me one day, purchased a great big ham, plastered a beard on it, and sent it to Welles, his way of showing disapproval. This night, several of us were gathered around a table at Mike Romanoff's. Mike's place had just opened. A lot of us came to his support, for he was a very popular figure, a self-proclaimed bum in those days, but a character and a lot of fun. Jack Barrymore, Pat O'Brien, Big Boy, and myself were at this table. For his enormous size and strength, Big Boy was a hypersensitive fellow, and if he felt he was slighted in any way, tears would come to his eyes and drop into his drinkin' whiskey, as he called it. Jack thought Williams was amusing and liked him enormously. Me too. Orson made one of his dramatic entrances. He stood at the door, filling it, his beard outthrust like a challenge. Pat O'Brien glanced over. "Hi, there's Orson Welles." Big Boy glanced around. glaring. Barrymore, absent-mindedly, for it was late in his life now and he was drinking heavily, looked puzzled. "Orson Welles?" he inquired. "Where's that?" He was under the impression that Orson Welles was some kind of watering place or spa, like Tunbridge Wells or Baden-Baden, some place where you take the waters. Pat knew Orson. I didn't. Neither did Jack. Neither did Big Boy. I could feel Big Boy stiffen. Those tremendous muscles went tense against my arm. He took a deep breath with dislike. Pat called, "Orson." Orson approached our table. "Hello, Pat." They shook hands across the boards. Orson was the boy genius of the day. He had everybody's attention. Everybody in Romanoff's looked up to see him at our table, impressed with his size, his bearing, and his sudden Promethean reputation. I personally had a tremendous respect for him as a showman, aside from his being a hell of an actor. Big Boy kept staring at the Easterner rancorously. Finally, in his low growl of a voice, Big Boy said, with emphasis, "You stupid-looking bastard." Wells' bushy eyebrows lifted. Big Boy enlarged upon his theme. "In all my goddamn life, I've never seen a more hammy, stupid-looking piece of blubber than you." I, from one side, gave him a jolt in the ribs. Pat O'Brien, on the other, must have done the same, because Big Boy grunted as if an Indian arrow had got him. Then a fragmentary silence. Big Boy said, "I would like to try that beard," as if it were phony. And one big paw came up and pulled it. The beard didn't come off. Affronted, Wells took a measuring look at Big Boy, probably one of the most powerful men you could ever find. He growled in that famous voice, "Sir, obviously, we had better go outside and settle this." That tickled Big Boy. "You silly bastard, you go outside with me?" Even Barrymore for once was silent, though he naturally enjoyed it. Anything like this pleased the great profile. I thought a hell of a lot of Orson's guts at that moment, for he was obviously no match for Big Boy. I hissed into William's ear, "Listen, you clunk, shut your trap. Leave the guy alone." Big Boy looked at me like a little boy, appealingly, but rebuffed. He decided to take the matter no further. I got up and said, "Sir, it has been a great pleasure to meet you." Wells, in ruffled Shakespearean style, decided that there was no point in making any more of it. That night, he had all the guts there was in Hollywood.